Welcome, everyone, to SI Media with Jimmy Traina. Thank you so much for listening. We have an excellent show this week. Bryan Curtis of The Ringer, who covers media for The Ringer, checks in. He's an SI Media regular. We have him on every 3-4 months to get his thoughts on the latest sports media headlines, latest sports media news. And we have a conversation about many things this week. Stephen A. Smith going outside the box lately, The Athletic, what's going on there after their layoffs, and media coverage of the Zion Williamson, if you want to call it, scandal, and a bunch of other topics with Bryan Curtis of The Ringer, followed by a man who is in the news as well, my buddy Sal Licata, who joins me every week for Traina Thoughts. He's getting a big promotion at WFAN. He's going to be moving from the overnight shift to the midday show, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., so we get the full scoop from Sal and get into what the week has been like for him after his big promotion. Before we get to Bryan Curtis and Sal Licata, just a quick reminder of recent guests in case you've missed any episodes of SI Media with Jimmy Traina. We had Scott Van Pelt on the podcast last week from ESPN. We had SiriusXM's Chris Mad Dog Russo, also a First Take 2 weeks ago. Pat McAfee 3 weeks ago. For the wrestling fans, Stone Cold Steve Austin 4 weeks ago. If you missed any of those, give them a listen, check them out in the archives, and subscribe to SI Media with Jimmy Traina. Leave a review on Apple. We'll read them. We're going to read those the week of 4th of July with Sal. All right, so that's what you need to know. Let's get to this week's show. Bryan Curtis of The Ringer, followed by Sal Licata and Traina Thoughts, all right here, right now, on SI Media with Jimmy Traina. All right, joining me now, he's a regular here on the SI Media with Jimmy Traina podcast. Always a great conversation from The Ringer. Covers all things media. Hosts the Press Box podcast. Bryan Curtis. Bryan, how's it going?
Good, Jimmy. How you doing, my friend?
Doing well. It's funny. I've wanted to have you on for a couple of weeks, and I saw a tweet from you. I think it was on Monday, maybe, which was like, okay, now I'm definitely got to reach out to Bryan. Someone had tweeted something about it being the 31st anniversary of something, and you said something about like, I'm a bad host. I should have pulled up the tweet, but it just came into my head where you said like, Twitter's great because you'll never forget a 31st anniversary. And I thought it was just such a phenomenal tweet. So I just wanted to start with that.
Somebody sent me an ESPN tweet today that was like the 11th anniversary of the Thunder breaking up the big three of Durant and Harden. And I was just kind of like, and Russ, and I was like, what? We were doing every anniversary now?
Oh yeah.
And if it doesn't matter if it's a round number, why do we even need the anniversary? Why don't we was like, hey, let's talk about Batman Returns, which I think that original tweet was about.
So it's funny because as someone who writes a daily column, I rely on those anniversaries heavily for content. And when I saw it, I was like, it's so funny that you said that. But I also have said for years, like, I don't understand why only the 5 and 0 anniversaries have to be celebrated. Like someone decided that if it's a 5 or 0, we celebrate it. It's just so random. It's just so random. So
yeah, people won't want to read something if it's on the 14th anniversary.
Exactly.
Rather than the 50th. That's the flip side of this. I remember when I was at Grantland and I was doing like an oral history of the Earthquake World Series in the Bay Area. And I called somebody, and it was like that. It was like a 14, or it was one off. And they're like, "Why aren't you calling me next year?" And I thought to myself, "Are you going to be any less interesting this year on this topic than we'll be next year?"
It's amazing, 5 and 0, and that's what gets everyone all worked up. It was funny over the weekend. I saw, I guess it was the 19th anniversary of the OJ Bronco chase, because it happened in '94, and. See, to me, I see OJ Bronco chase. The only thing I think of is the Al Michaels prank phone call with Peter Jennings. So on Monday, I had to acknowledge that the 19th anniversary just passed. I don't know what we're going to do next year for the 20th, but something big has to happen.
You and I are just the only demented people in the world who think of the entire OJ story as boiling down to Al Michaels being able to snuff out a prank phone call on ABC.
I've told this story before. I'll tell it again quickly. I think it must have been the 15th anniversary of the call. And I remember I wrote an entire column for SI.com. I led my column that day with the premise was everyone thinks Al Michaels' greatest call is, "Do you believe in miracles?" and the miracle on ice. And I said, absolutely not. His greatest call ever was when he said to Peter Jennings, "Peter, lest anyone think that was a real call, it was totally farcical." He said something indicative of a radio host. And Peter Jennings goes, "We have him on every coast." And that afternoon or the next day, maybe, I get an email from an email address that was a little suspect saying, "Jimmy, thanks for the write-up. Couldn't agree more. That definitely was my best call. And Baba Booey to you all." So me, I just assumed it was one of my readers trying to be funny because I have some wacky readers going back from the Hot Clicks days. So I ignored it. I didn't pay attention because, maybe the cynic in me. And like a week later, I get an email from an NBC PR guy who I do know, who I do business with, and says, "Yeah, Al wanted to know if you got his email." So it was Al. And Al thinks the prank call was better than the miracle on ice. So that's the lesson here for everyone. So
you were worried it could be a prank email.
Right.
About your reference to this prank call.
Exactly. Well, because the sign off on the email was Baba Booey to you all. So I'm like, okay, this is obviously one of my Howard Stern fans who also reads my stuff. And it was Al. So
did I see this on Twitter the other day that Al was calling Pat McAfee the new king of all media?
Yes.
I did not click through that. But that really happened?
That happened.
That's kind of a big deal. You know about how Al feels about Howard Stern.
Right. Yeah, I think Al was very happy to be on Pat McAfee. And he, listen, there is a dominance there with Pat McAfee in terms of, YouTube. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens when he goes to ESPN in terms of, I think there's going to be a lot of, I talked about this with Chris Russo a couple of weeks ago because he experienced this when he started doing First Take. I mean, no matter what's going on in the world, when you are on ESPN, you are getting an audience that may not be familiar with you. I mean, they still have that power despite what lunatics want to say about, ESPN is dying, et cetera, and all that nonsense. Yeah. So I think Pat will be exposed to some new fans.
Yeah. He had he said something really interesting when he took that deal where he said, like, basic cable, though it is shrinking and crumbling before our eyes, it's still a thing. And it's still this fire hose to all these people that, frankly, if they don't watch Game Day, may not know who Pat McAfee is, or at least don't know much about him. And all of a sudden, they will turn on E1, linear ESPN, and be like, "Hey, that guy." And that does make you a bigger deal in a lot of people's minds.
And listen, all you have to do is look at it's to me, as someone of my age who grew up TV. It's insane to me to see how little general television is watched, and then you have sports come in, and all these people are watching sports on basic TV, basic cable, linear, however you want to describe it. If it weren't for sports, who knows what would be going on with some of these networks.
It's so funny because sports is the one part of television that's almost like it was when you and I were growing up in the 80s.
Yeah.
Sitcoms aren't the same. Dramas aren't the same. News isn't the same. But sports is pretty close. And if it's anything, it's a much bigger part of the network than it was in the old days. And I find that fascinating because I grew up, like you, in this era where it's like TV was huge. And especially the networks still had a huge chunk of the audience. And the only time that happens now is when there's football on television and to a lesser extent basketball and other stuff.
I mean, if you take out like title games and championships, the most watched thing on all of television on a week in, week out basis is Sunday at 4:25 on either CBS or Fox.
Yep.
It's, and Sunday night on NBC is right there. So for all this streaming and cable and this and cancel, it's still dominant. I mean, they just had a great rating for the U.S. Open golf over the weekend.
I saw that for Wyndham Clark.
There you go. Don't even need Tiger. Got a handful of sports media topics to get into with you. The biggest sports media topic is your boss, Bill Simmons, obviously, calling Harry and Meghan fucking grifters. I'm not going to ask you to comment because it's your boss, and what are you going to say about your boss? I will say, though, I don't know. If you want to comment, you can. If you don't, and I understand everything with those two seems to go crazy, and I don't get it because I don't care, but I'm amazed how that story spread like a fire hose. I mean, CNN was covering it and legitimate news outlets, which I think, again, I don't want you to, I think speaks more to Meghan and Harry than Bill, despite Bill being this enormous, popular podcast host, successful, starter at all for all of us doing podcasts. But my God, that reaction was, I couldn't believe it just from that one line.
I'll let Bill speak for himself, but I will say this about the Royals. I am not a Royals watcher or Royals person, as you probably expect from knowing me, on number one. But number two, I read Prince Harry's book when it came out, written by J.R. Morner, who wrote Andre Agassi's book and was an awesome, awesome writer. That book ruled. I'm sorry. I read that thing and I'm just flipping pages. I'm like, this is fascinating.
Yeah.
And people are like, I don't like him because he came off as very shallow and callow and weird in this book. And I'm like, well, I think that probably captured him to a certain extent. I think that's him. And the kind of the genius of it is it's a book by him that at least in some way accurately captured what he is, rather than, like the usually is with celebrity memoirs, what they to be seen as. This is fascinating. And I was just, again, I don't care about any of this stuff. I don't watch The Crown. It doesn't matter to me. But I'm tearing through this thing like it was, the greatest sports book of all time. It was awesome.
I mean, the knock that I always see is they say they don't want attention and then they do things to get attention. But I don't know. I mean, I don't think you write a book, you have to go on a media tour to sell the book. So I thought that was an unfair criticism. People are like, well, why is he on Colbert? Well, he's got to sell the book. He's got obligations to the book company, the publisher. I mean, that's just how media works. But like I don't I don't follow it and know much about it, but I do know from what I've heard about the book and things he said about the book. I mean, how do you expect he's not going to be a normal person. So he's going to have stories in that book that like, you were fascinated by. Yeah. I mean, he's got this family that is actually, bizarre. So what do you expect him to tell you in the book?
I know. And the Oprah thing too. I mean, that was another thing. It was like, what's that? And you didn't have to care about anything. You're like, I want to hear what this guy says about his family.
Well, I hope Bill addresses it on his podcast. That's the MO these days. Say something, get attention, and then you get another, then milk it on your podcast, write a column. That's sort of the MO these days, which is surreal to see, but that's usually, I know that wasn't Bill's intention. Bill doesn't do that, but I'm just saying that if other people are in Bill's shoes, they would have had a week's worth of like content out of just, the comment and the pickup. It's crazy. Couple of things I wanted to get into. So I find this to be a very underrated sports media story that's been going on now for several weeks. No one's really gotten into it. And I don't know, maybe people are it's fun and they're going along for the ride, but it's kind of crazy to me to see what Stephen A. Smith is doing on his podcast, which is not affiliated with ESPN. I mean, we've all known for years it's legendary how ESPN wants ESPN people to stick to doing ESPN things and not sort of venture outside the box. And he has this podcast that has nothing to do with ESPN. And every single episode, he's saying the most insane, he's covering whether it's political, whether it's Zion Williamson, whether it's he got into the flasher at the White House and was talking about, he was using the word titties repeatedly on his podcast. I mean, to me, this is insane to see ESPN's, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, top person. And then he does this side gig that is everything that is the antithesis of what they've wanted their people to do. Have you picked up on that? Have you noticed that? Am I pulling at straws here? What do we got?
Yeah, so two things I think there that are fascinating. One is this idea that you can have a side business while you're at ESPN that's not an ESPN. That's completely new. And as you point out, like that would not have worked. I mean, first of all, Kirk Herbstreit doing Amazon, I thought was an underrated story. The fact that he is launching essentially a competitor to ESPN. I mean, again, that's not something that would have happened in the old network. And it's reserved. And this is, I guess, point number 2 for the most powerful people at ESPN, Stephen A. being somewhere at the top of the list. I mean, I saw George Santos he was talking about the other day on the podcast. There's just this whole, this idea that talking about politics, as you and I know, at ESPN is just absolutely something they are not interested in. And not only is he talking about it, he tweets the other day, hey, I think you should contribute to Chris Christie's presidential campaign because he needs what happens is you need a certain number of contributors to get on the debate stage for the Republicans in August. And I'm like, I have never seen a media member not only talk politics, but link to a fundraising, page.
Right.
Essentially encouraging people to contribute to a presidential campaign. That's way different than being like, I like this candidate, I don't like this candidate. And last I checked, that was still up. That was not, ESPN wasn't like, hey, we can't have you saying contribute to X candidate. That was fine. And I just think like, okay, so I guess that's the rules for Stephen A.
I think he came out on one episode and said like Joe Biden's got to go.
Yeah, I think it was actually a Fox News interview, right? Was that the one?
I thought he did it on it. Okay, maybe he did it on both. Yeah.
Speaking of things also that probably other ESPN personalities aren't doing are freewheeling Fox News interviews.
Right.
But again, like, I don't know that whatever. It's like that he wants Chris Christie to be in the Republican debates doesn't bother me at all, but that's a completely different standard for anybody. I do not encourage anybody at ESPN to link to fundraising pages of presidential candidates because it's not going to go well for you like it did for Stephen A.
Yeah, and I mean, from what McAfee told me, I had him on the pod a few weeks ago, and from what he told me, ESPN's not really going to have any content creative control into his show. It's more like a business deal where they'll do the ad sales and all that kind of stuff. And Pat's going to be able to do his thing. He's got his WWE deal. And I think he's another one, if you're at the top of the food chain, you sort of can do what you want, which that wasn't even the case years ago at ESPN.
No, I mean, if we went back to the Dan and Keith era, they would tell you that the bigger the star you became at ESPN, the more pushback you got.
Yeah.
Because besides like Boomer and a few others, and maybe Dickie V for the old days, they didn't want people becoming big stars there necessarily.
Right.
They wanted the brand to be ESPN. They didn't want the brand to be you.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but to me, the moment we crossed this Rubicon in retrospect was when Peyton Manning came on, but didn't come on as a full-time employee. Came on as the producer of a show that ESPN was putting on its air.
Yep.
And I kind of went, and it was interesting because it was right at a moment of like athlete empowerment era and all kinds of things happening where athletes are like, you know what? And that was mixed up in media in a way. Like, you know what? I'm going to do my own thing.
Yeah.
And from then on, everybody's kind of been doing their own thing. Even when, in McAfee's case, his own thing is going to be on ESPN's air. It's kind of like, but I'm controlling this. I got this. Yeah. I'm not exactly an employee of yours, even if I am technically an employee. I have all this autonomy that nobody could have imagined a couple of years ago.
And the Peyton, when the first year of the Manning cast, it came on like gangbusters, and people loved it. And I got so many tweets and emails from readers about, why are there only 10? Why don't they do it every week? Why? And I wrote this and I tried to explain, like, ESPN has no control over it's an Omaha Productions deal. Yeah. And ESPN is just, Peyton doesn't want to do 16 weeks. So what's the regular season now? 17 weeks. Peyton doesn't want to work 17 weeks. He doesn't want to do it every week. And ESPN can't make him because it's not an ESPN deal. It's an Omaha Productions deal. And, to the average fan who's not in this like us, they don't understand that or know that.
No, totally. But it's like and he also doesn't want to leave his house.
Yeah, right.
I mean, the old days, the network controlled you, and here you go here, and you go here, and you do this show, and you get on this plane. And now it's like, if you're in that top tier,
right,
you can have that kind of leverage.
And it's interesting because I think they have obviously, set a precedent there because now, Andrew Marchand of the Post reported this week that J.J. Watt is going to end up with some network, but he doesn't want to do it full time. He wants to do a part-time gig. And if you have the name value of, J.J. Watt, you can do that and dictate those terms, and you'll still get a deal from one of these networks.
Yeah, and I think what's changed is just athletes not wanting to do their own thing, like we're talking about, having the sense of control. And also it's like they just have made so much more money over their careers than athletes did 20, 30 years ago.
Right.
So the idea of like, I'm going to really devote a chunk of my life, and you really have to do that to be good at these jobs. Like, I'm going to give up for half the year, basically every day of the week, to be great at this. Like, I think that's just not as appealing to people because you made a ton of money and you're like, why would I want to do that rather than completely set my own schedule?
It's a great point. And also the networks, I mean, it's good to see them realize, like, you have 87 people on each pregame show. So if JJ Watt works like 10 of 16 weeks, you'll survive. It's not like you won't have coverage.
I know. We still need to pass a rule, you and I, about the number of people that are allowed to be on any pregame show at the same time.
It's insane.
It's so insane. Bad. And for some reason, it just keeps getting bigger.
Yeah. Get as many of those ex-players as you can. That's basically the formula. And I mentioned Stephen A. He on the podcast that has nothing to do with ESPN. He was doing like full breakdowns of the Zion Williamson story with the porn star going on Twitter and making all these claims and tweeting all this wild stuff. And you can't help but avoid seeing her tweets. People get retweeted in your feed. People are sending them to you. You look at them, and I've wondered for, like, when this whole thing started, like, what are you supposed to do if you're ESPN, if you're The Athletic, if you're The Ringer, if you're like, are you supposed to cover this in some way, shape, or form? Does it have nothing to do with basketball and you shouldn't cover it? Because I'm torn on it. I think I can make the argument both ways. What do you think?
It's a fascinating question. By the way, sports radio, no problem. Every sports radio show I listened to did a segment or 10 segments about this.
Yep.
They were not conflicted about how they should treat this material. They wanted to just lay out all the details. It's really funny. I think the ones you mentioned, like The Athletic and some of the just straight up and down news style sports sites, they'll probably treat it like they would have treated it 10, 20 years ago, which is if Zion gets asked about it, at some point here in a couple of months, they'll record his answers.
Right.
Maybe by the way, if Zion actually gets traded here in the next 48 hours, which is at least somewhat on the table, more on the table, don't you think we'll find out that part of it's the injuries, number one, by the way, a huge number one, but number two down the list is, hey, there's just a lot going on, and maybe that pushed the Pelicans to the brink of trading him.
That's where I think you can make the case because, he never plays. There's all this controversy surrounding him, and then he may be traded. That's where I think you can make the case and say, oh, well, was this woman with all these claims, a factor in the Pelicans saying, enough is enough?
Yeah, totally. But it's like we live in this kind of interesting world now where if those big mainstream publications haven't really changed their approach to a story like this all that much, as you say, it's sort of unavoidable. It's just like you just get on Twitter or just do any kind of search and there's a billion things for you to read if you're so inclined. Like before we got on today, I was just Googling around and I found a headline that said, Andrew Bogut drops a truth bomb about the Zion Williamson situation. Like, what the hell? That headline exists. That story exists. And I'm like, okay. I mean, there's just so much out there if you are so inclined.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up the sports radio because obviously this is huge on Twitter. So something is on Twitter, everyone on sports radio seems to follow. It used to be where sports radio would follow in the footsteps of what's in the newspapers. Now they follow what's on Twitter, and that can be dicey. It can. I'm not sure that's the right way to go at all times.
Twitter's become our programmer in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Not just radio, all of us. Podcasters, ESPN, talk shows. This is why the Woj bomb and all this stuff is powerful. It's like there's a new movie trailer out. And I mean, how much like all of a sudden all the conversation becomes about this movie trailer.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm just like, this is what we're talking about right now. We have no ideas. We're just waiting for something to come across Twitter to program our pod or whatever. It's weird.
And I get frustrated too because I'm of the belief, and I must be the only one, but I just wish people didn't cover certain things. Like I don't even want to say it because I don't ever cover it, but like you don't have to cover certain people and certain shows just because they say something insane. Like I just wish we could all as a collective say, like, we're not going to cover this, and no matter what they say, and make them go away. But, people need the clicks.
I thought about this with the Stephen A stuff because we're in this weird Stephen A aggregation zone. I think largely because of that podcast you're talking about that's not inside ESPN. Where on the one hand, everybody says of the opinion guys, you know what? They're saying things in order to be inflammatory and to get attention and to drive the news cycle. Let's not do it. But then I look at Twitter and everything Stephen A says is aggregated.
Right.
Stephen A wants to host Wheel of Fortune for a couple of days. Right. That's aggregated.
Right.
That's not much of a declaration, by the way. I want to host a couple of shows while they find out their new host. Okay.
Oh.
Like, is there a lot of famous people would probably, raise their hand and say yes to that. But you couldn't look around. Stephen A throws his hat in the ring to host Wheel of Fortune. I'm like, okay. Did we have to rush to the stop the presses for that one?
Yeah, I mean, listen. I know it because I do it. There are certain sports figures you put them in a headline and people are going to click no matter what. So
let's do the list: Stephen A, Pat McAfee,
your boss, Bill Simmons.
Okay.
Brady, Rodgers, LeBron, Aaron Andrews,
anybody who plays for the Dallas Cowboys,
Jerry Jones.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's not that, no one from baseball, no one from hockey. Eliminate that. And, go from there. It made me think of the whole thing earlier this week with Joe Rogan offering $100,000 to the doctor to debate him. And it's like, I was just so and this is not about what I believe or what you believe I was just so happy the doctor said no, because I wish more people would say, forget that money. Like, there's no win in that situation for that doctor. No win. No matter what, you could come out with every fact, you can come out with every proof, but you're never going to win in that situation because he's got his audience who believes what they believe. So, like, they're never going to change their minds. And I feel like I just wish more people would do what the doctor did and say, like, no, I'm not engaging in this. Just don't. But now I see the doctors on Twitter, and I wish the doctor would get off Twitter too, because that's just as bad as engaging. Like, so just don't be on Twitter and don't tweet about this because you're just fueling the fire.
But an asterisk, please come on Jimmy and I's podcast when we ask you to, because
I don't even know if
we have excellent intentions, and you should never turn those invitations down.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not here. The thought of saying to someone, I'll give you $100,000, come on my podcast and debate. And how anyone wouldn't see that situation as being nothing but a complete disaster, I don't understand. But the doctor saw that it was a disaster, so good for him. I'm happy for the doctor.
No debate.
The Athletic is another topic that has been getting a lot of attention. They had layoffs, unfortunately, which, I mean, every media company is having layoffs, but their layoffs, and I hate talking about layoffs, but theirs were a little different in that it seems like their layoffs are sort of leading to a change in the way they operate. I mean, their whole thing was local coverage, and now it seems that's gone out the window, and now it's national coverage. If you're an Athletic fan, how bad of a sign is this?
A weird sign, because the whole premise of the site was, we're going to cover your local team. Your newspaper is shrinking or going away entirely, and we're going to be there and say, damn it, the San Diego Padres are important, even if they're not important, or let's say very clickable in the national sports media world. It's important to us, so we're going to have somebody there. And now, as you say, they're going to this model where it's more national writers, it's more generalists. And I think the question you have to answer is, like, who is that for? Right? You're getting away from a model because you're saying, after trying this for several years, hey, maybe there aren't that many people that just want to read a beat writer about this relatively smallish team, even if it's a pro team. But I would counter with the other question of how many people are just going to read general sports features every day. I believe that you can kind of engineer those so that you do things that are clickable and go viral in some way. And they've done this with a bunch of oral histories that all seem reverse engineered to me to go viral.
Right.
That seem like they were written because another story like this was popular. So let's write it again. In some cases, literally the same topic 3 or 4 or 5 times. But I just don't know who that's for either. And I'm kind of like, I don't know. I don't necessarily, I've been a subscriber for The Athletic for a long time. I read about the Dallas teams because I'm from North Texas and I'm like into the Cowboys and all that stuff. And I really, really like a lot of the reporters they've had there. But I'm also like, I look at this new version, I'm like, I don't know what this is. And I don't know. And I haven't heard somebody articulate an idea at the Times about what The Athletic's going to be. That's kind of what I'm waiting for.
Yeah. Well, once the Times bought The Athletic, if you're in this business, I mean, how could you not have expected some changes? But
sure,
this was I thought a little jarring.
It's interesting to me too because there's a Cowboys writer really like Bob Sturm, who's like a big sports radio host in Dallas. In addition to being a Cowboys writer, I think he's the best writer in the Cowboys beat, and he's one of the ones that is going away. And I'm just like, what was the calculation? We have the best writer on one of the most popular beats, a story that's national. Everything the Cowboys do is a national story.
Yep.
What? Who decided that? So I don't know. I just don't, and again, even with like when you and I cover layoffs at ESPN, there's always this tendency, ESPN is dead, it's gone. It's not dead, it's fine. There's plenty of stuff there. And The Athletic, we're talking about, 4% of their writers, something like that, I think got laid off in this round. Lots and lots of people there and lots of good people.
Yep.
But just in terms of the direction of the site, I don't know what it is. And I haven't, had anybody articulate that to me. And the little notions I've heard of that haven't been particularly promising to me at all.
Like you, I was very surprised to see Bob Sturm. You have a Cowboy writer. I mean, you could make the argument you could have 5 Cowboy writers over a national writer, and you're going to get more traffic that way. And then I was very surprised. Bill Shea, who covers media and business.
Yeah.
And there was another guy, I forgot his name now, who covers business, sports business. That stuff usually does well. That stuff is usually... I was surprised they were let go. We actually have breaking. Marchand just tweeted this. I'm going to read it to you. It just came out. It says ESPN is
letting Twitter program our shows. Here we go.
Well, it's a media story. It says ESPN is scrapping Keyshawn Johnson, Jay Williams, and Max Kellerman morning show as layoffs loom. That's pretty big because. Yeah. I mean, listen, those are 3 guys who are probably all making decent money there. Keyshawn as a former NFL player. Kellerman's been there for a while. There's no, I don't know. Like I said, this just broke, so I'm not sure what's going to happen in the mornings. They have obviously McAfee going there, but any initial reaction just to hearing that right as I'm reading it to you as it comes down?
Well, the first one is, ESPN radio, I think, is a big question mark. Generally speaking, the morning show is a particular question mark because ever since Mike and other guy, they've tried to figure that slot out and haven't been able to figure it out. But I also think this is what we've been talking about with ESPN. ESPN is all about max players right now. It's about Stephen A. It's about Pat McAfee and a handful of other people. And if you're not in that handful of other people, the network is pretty scary right now. Yeah. Because they are clearly going to build around that group. And if I'm somebody else who's not in that group and makes a decent salary, this is not somebody who's a, smallish person in that whole, giant salary system, but somebody who makes a decent salary, I'd be really worried.
Yeah.
Right.
I should be clear. I mean, by the time people listen to this, they'll know the real story, but I should be clear for you. Those 3 guys haven't been let go. It's the morning show that they host that's been canceled, according to Marchand. It is amazing.
Idea.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. And it's amazing to me for all the success ESPN has had. They've had, and despite what everyone says, they've had massive successes. Sports Center, whether it's Scott Van Pelt at night, and say we on about First Take, but that does well. Pardon the Interruption and Around the Horn. They've been on for. They can't get it together with like a morning. I mean, they had Mike and Mike, and it still was. bizarre, that breakup to me, because it was successful in the way that it made money and, ad sales and all that. Obviously, they wanted to spin Greenberg off and make him sort of one of the faces that you had mentioned with McAfee and Stephen A. He's all over the place he's on a Get Up, and then he has a show, and then he's on NBA coverage. So that sort of left Golick hanging. But ESPN Radio overall always seems to struggle, and they can't get it together, it seems like, ESPN.
And they've had great shows on there, like Ryan Russillo, my current coworker, and Dan Patrick's show I thought was really good back in the day. Mike and Mike was not my cup of tea, but it was a very, very successful money-making sports radio show. Yep. I think national sports radio is so hard to do, and it's probably getting harder, if anything. It's always weird whenever I'm like in the car and I have Sirius on, I hear some of the weirdest shows as national sports radio shows.
Yes.
I'll just like flip on during a segment. I'm like, what is this? Why am I supposed to stop here and listen to this?
And those are the shows that are relying on like the Zion Williamson story, because that will maybe appeal is the wrong word, but they'll grab the attention of a national audience.
Mm-hmm.
So
sports radio is in this weird position anyway, with podcasting and just the way the world's changing, and the whole audio experience is just different from the days when you and I were driving around and listening to that, because that was the only game in town. But I just think nationally, now when you're just trying to say, what is a segment that people are going to like listen to this, instead of being like, I'm going to go listen to a podcast. I'm going to go listen to news about the Cowboys. That's tough.
Since you brought that up, I wasn't going to go here, but it could be a good place to go before we wrap up. You have a podcast. What is your biggest frustrations about doing a podcast?
Frustrations about doing a podcast. I think sometimes...
Don't tell me you don't have any.
No. Jimmy, I'm as happy as I've ever been in my life. That's actually true. But, I think sometimes the speed of it... I think here's the cool thing about radio is that it is instantaneous. And sometimes you do get a story where you're like, I just want to be talking to people right now.
Yeah.
Whether it's like a huge news story, it's a huge media story that we get our things into. And it's almost like, and of course we move quickly and get stuff up very, very quickly and all that stuff. And our producers are awesome. But there is time when there is like an immediacy of live radio.
Yeah.
And not only the speed of it, but the feeling of it that I just love as an old school person, and I'm like, I love it that somebody is speaking into a microphone. I'm hearing it right now, as it comes out of their mouth. And there's an energy to that. There's a danger to that, which is probably good for us podcasters, that there's a little bit of a post-production process sometimes so that, we think about all that stuff. But yeah, I guess that'd probably be it.
Well, the big thing now, is you're supposed to take your cell phone and stick it an inch from your face and talk while you're walking and give your hot take on whatever news is breaking at that moment. That's sort of
just get like a good angle up here. There hasn't been that much demand, I'm going to be honest, for Bryan Curtis walking down the street in California. And I'm not going to go record one about the ESPN morning show after this.
Yeah, see, that's I'm trying to put off doing those as long as I can.
When you and I get to that point, the world will have changed.
The world has changed.
The world has changed. Morning show.
Do you have help booking your podcast?
On certain people that it's available, but I almost do all of them myself.
And
just
you didn't name that as
media
one of
member to media member. I want to be the one asking it, and also I want to make sure that they know what I want to talk about. And I sort of like value writing those emails myself a lot.
Yeah, I'm bad because I ask you to come on and I don't tell you what we're going to talk about, and then you check in on it. And I give you.
Well, when it comes from you, I'm always happy to get it. No, I've been just
because the truth is, it's like I'm waiting. I'm waiting till the last minute to see what's going on. Like you said, everything changes so fast. So I don't want to tell you topics on a Monday for a Wednesday because who the hell knows what's going to happen.
But this, like coming from you, Jimmy, it's different for people forget me, I'm available. But for a broadcaster who's busy or, who's doing 100 things like that, that's like a big deal, that it comes from you rather than from some third party.
Yeah, I agree. Oh yeah, absolutely. It's got to come from you. It has to come from you. But I didn't know if you have like bookers or, who will say, oh, this person's available, you should reach out to them, or
Yeah, sometimes there's some of that at the Ringer and stuff, but
Yeah.
and also I'm just talking to a lot of print journalists, so it's like, am I gonna,
Yeah.
it seems like I should write that email.
Well,
Print writer for journalist to print journal.
you do a great job with the guests. I'm always envious of who you get on.
Thank you.
Because I know that part of it is not easy. And
Right
my
back
listeners
at you,
are probably
buddy.
like, shut up and stop complaining about booking your podcast because I do it often. So, you know what I'm thinking?
It's fun.
Well, let me ask you, because this is what goes through my head. Once the NBA, I talked about this last week a little bit. Once the NBA ends, okay, so now I'm looking, it's like
Here we
June
are.
21st. I'm like, who the hell is going to come on here and be interesting before football starts? Because once football starts, it's easy. I can get Joe Buck and I can get Jim Nance and we can go through But when the only thing going on is Major League Baseball, which is not exactly a needle mover. I love it. People get so mad when I say it. I'm like, I love baseball, but I can't, roll out Ron Darling and expect to get the same downloads as, whatever. Not see, I shouldn't have said the name there, but
Yeah,
it was just a general, John Smoltz or whatever.
Ron, we were just throwing out a name.
Yeah.
We didn't mean you.
I don't think John Smoltz is going to bring the excitement as a, Greg Olson, for instance, so in terms of listeners. So do you think that way, or you're just like, I got to do this every week and I can't think that way?
So sometimes I think getting people in the off season is fun. I also think that as a writer, because everybody's calm and you're not just in the thick of it in the way you are during the season, especially with an announcer. I think the other fun part of the off season is sometimes, and I'd say this literally because I'm about to go on vacation in like 2 days for a couple of weeks. And so I recorded some episodes of the pod. It's often a fun chance to just kind of do something you've been wanting to do, but haven't had a chance to do because we're so in the middle of football or basketball or whatever it is.
Right.
So to me, that's another really cool part of it. It's like, I want to
100%. Yeah. I've thought that too. Cause I'm like, okay, these next 2 months, I'm going to have on anyone who I've ever wanted to have on. And it doesn't matter if it has anything to do with sports, and we'll have fun and we'll have comedians on it. And then I'm like, wait a second, how am I going to get these people on? So that's the other problem.
It's so funny because it turns us all into like the bookers from the Johnny Carson Tonight Show circle, like 1989. Where, there are people that are coming on because they have movies, right, that are coming on. But then there's other weeks or other guests and all that stuff. And you often think like, I just imagine, Fred DeCordova calling a comedian, I know you're, can you come on today and fill in a slot for me? And, we'll just do fun stuff. I mean, that's part of what this is, really.
I appreciate you putting us in the same category as Johnny.
Well, that was I'm shooting for the stars.
I just saw
Johnny was a great interviewer.
I just saw, that's what it was. I saw some, believe it or not. I mean, talk about, you wouldn't expect this, but scrolling through TikTok yesterday, I saw there was a clip. It was like a 3-minute clip of like Johnny's best moments and it's amazing. Like back then, it was just. The littlest thing could be funny. It didn't have to be so overly, right now you have to have carpool karaoke or, stole my Halloween candy. Like back then.
It didn't have to be a bit.
Right.
That way. Johnny did a lot of bits, he did characters and dressed up and all that stuff. But like, I'm sure those interviews were very like pre-screened and, they did a lot of pre-interview and all that stuff. But like, it didn't feel like such, it didn't feel like Jimmy Fallon, which is the ultimate, like, this feels so manufactured and there's so much fake laughing going on. And, like, I'm dying laughing at this thing I knew you were about to say. Something about it just felt a little more relaxed.
There is nothing a guest can say where Jimmy Fallon wouldn't laugh.
More
like the guy could come out and be like,
Jimmy Fallon, more fake laughing, I'm sorry, on Jimmy Fallon or NFL pregame shows. What are you going
Fallon. I actually think Fallon.
He's the new leader of the clubhouse.
The NFL pregame shows do the fake laughter, but I feel like, you got to sell for your guy and the guy's making a joke. Where Fallon is solo, but he's selling for the guest at all. But like, I don't think Fallon actually, like the pregame show guys are laughing at stuff that's stupid. Whereas Fallon, I don't think he's even listening. Like, I think if a guest came out and said, like, my house went on fire last week, he would laugh. It's just an automatic. Any word that comes out, he laughs. Like, it's just, I don't think he listens. I just think he's like, he knows word stop, I laugh.
It just feels so artificial. There's so much TV now that you just watch. And again, maybe I just, as a 10-year-old, didn't care. because we like grew up with laugh tracks. I mean, talk about something completely artificial. But
Right.
I'll like watch The Masked Singer accidentally, and it's like it's edited within an inch of its life, so that there's just no moment where it's just a television show. It's like reaction
Right.
shot, reaction shot, reaction shot. You know, the host just pounding the table with laughter. I'm just like, this doesn't feel like real life in any way.
That's the Jimmy. I will put on Jimmy Fallon now just to see how ridiculous the laughing gets. And that's the thing now. Every line gets like a slam on the desk. The chair goes back. He's hunched over. It's like you're not watching Eddie Murphy delirious. You've got to calm down a little bit. But he's just, it's not just the laugh. It's just the, oh my God, it's so funny. And he's banging on the desk and he's like throwing his head back. And it's like, okay. I mean,
you know who I was kind of an interesting, like early violator here. And I say that, I hate to even say this, but it was Letterman. If you watch Letterman the last like 10 years of the CBS show, the audience felt like it was just like absolutely like they were watching the funniest thing they've ever heard, even when Dave would kind of do a very lame joke.
Yeah, yeah.
The audience just felt like it was turbocharged in this very artificial way.
Yeah.
And back in the late night days, like the audience often felt uncomfortable and not totally sure whether they should laugh or not. And then you get Dave and he's like, audience is just howling at anything. And it made the show suck.
So here's what's so funny about you saying this. And we can end it on this. This is so funny. So last week I tweeted this. I was in a 2-hour YouTube rabbit hole of watching old Letterman stuff. And he's got, I mean, his interviews with like Julia Roberts and the Joaquin Phoenix thing. And I was just watching all this stuff.
Cher
calling him an asshole was great. And there was the monologue he did. It was like maybe 8 to 11 minutes. Something in that range, where he explained when he was getting extorted and he was having the affairs with interns and I tweeted it's a remarkable piece of television. If anyone hasn't seen it or you haven't seen it since it happened, because of the audience, they didn't know if he was doing a bit. They didn't know if he was being serious. They're laughing at inappropriate times. Like he's like, and the way he set it up as a bit almost, because he talked for like 8 minutes about this guy extorting him and going to the authorities and all this stuff. And then he says for like the last 2 minutes where he says, and the thing that I did bad was I had sex with people who work for me. Now, and then people are laughing in the audience. That line today, now this was 2009, I believe. If you got on TV today and said that, you're done. And the audience is laughing at all these weird times in it. And he's doing it like the psychology of it was, I was trying to figure out, like, did he do it this way to soften them up so the backlash wouldn't? And it's a remarkable piece of television. It's funny because I tweeted it last week and a lot of people are responding about, they did, like when they watched it, they're like, what is with the audience in that clip? And I'm like, that's why it's a remarkable piece of television.
So fascinating. So fascinating. I gotta go back and watch that.
You have to watch it. It's like,
I do remember the laughs and people did not sure whether they should laugh. And it was
because he's telling it like one of his bits.
Yeah. And they couldn't tell.
Yeah. So if anyone hasn't seen it, go on YouTube and just do David Letterman extortion or extorted or whatever. It'll come right up. Nice title. All right, Bryan, appreciate it. Always love chatting with you. Enjoy your vacation. We'll check in with you in a few months. And, hopefully there's no Meghan and Harry shrapnel coming your way.
Same to you, Jimmy. And say hi to Ron Darling for me, please.
Thank you. All right, joining me now, as he does every week for our Traina Thoughts segment from SNY TV in New York and WFAN Radio in New York, which is noteworthy because he is no longer, as of July 24th, going to be on the fan from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. It's going to be 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. as he comes back to society with the rest of us. So happy, so proud, so excited for the big promotion for Sal Licata.
Do I really need to join society, or can I just enjoy some sleep and be left alone? I mean, that's
Now you're going to be a functioning member of society.
I honestly, it's still surreal even now as we tape this, a day later after the announcements that I've known for a little less than a week. But it's just I still can't even believe that this is real life, and I'm going to be done with the overnights and on during the day. Hard to believe.
10 a.m. to 2 p.m. now for Sal on WFAN in New York. Big move up. You deserve it. You've worked hard. And I think it's going to be a fun ride for you.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that. And everybody's been kind, for the most part. But I don't know about the deserve thing. I mean, I get what you're saying. Look, I've worked my ass off for this, but you've got to be lucky. You've got to be good. You've got to be hardworking, dedicate yourself to it. I feel like I've done all that. I'm very proud of the accomplishment. I don't like the deserve thing. It feels weird.
You deserve it from the standpoint of you paid your dues. I mean, you've worked at other stations, you've worked crazy shifts, you've worked fill-in. Right. You did. There was an incident. You came back. You worked your way up.
I mean, you could look. It's part of the story. So I mean, getting fired and coming back from it. You were there for it. You remember that well as we were going through that. Like, I don't look at it as a negative thing. I would not change anything. That made me better. Not for that, I would not be here today. Look, one thing that I do like that you say when you go into the detailed example, I think people from afar just see, oh, he's on the fan, whether it's overnight, whether it is midday, and they think like, oh, I could do that. They don't see the 13 years of work after getting fired, building myself back up and doing shows on in Florida from my apartment, working at MLB.com. Like, people don't even know half the stuff, not to mention doing the overnights and things like that. Not to mention the 7 years before that from an intern, board op, producer. Like, it's just same thing where I used to grow up, you watch wrestling, right? You see Hulk Hogan, you see Jake the Snake. Years later, you learn that they were in other territories, kind of in the minor leagues before they get to be in that prime spot. You don't understand unless you go through it. So that's what I'm most proud of, all the work that I put in to finally have this opportunity.
Well, that's what I mean by deserved.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you said that you getting fired from the fan is part of the story, because if I'm involved, it's absolutely part of the story, because I saw you the night before and I was like, don't worry about anything. Nothing's going to happen. You're going to be fine. And the next day you got fired and I felt like shit. So that's why I'm out. Thank God you're on 10 to 2 now, because,
it's no big deal. You have nothing to worry about. Yeah. I was worried.
What a terrible friend.
You weren't alone. God. There were other people too. They're like, don't worry about it. It's no big deal. You're not going to get fired for that. Boom. Don't come in today.
And the next day, oh my God.
Yeah, we were at the main event. I remember that well, that conversation. Yeah.
So do I. When Marchand broke the news that you were going to be moved from overnights to the 10 to 2 spot, I sent out a tweet and I could not believe the reaction just to my tweet. So I would imagine this has been a crazy 48 hours for you.
It's been nonstop. And when I say, there are two words that I think people use, and I've used them in my life, where you like kind of feel them. But this week, these 2 days in particular, I've never felt more accurate using these two words: overwhelmed and surreal. Like, it is still surreal to me, and I'm completely overwhelmed by the texts that are still coming through. So Marchand broke that story. And he texted me saying, I'm going to run, like, I didn't talk to him before. I don't know how he got it. And he texted me saying, I'm going to run this story. And he asked like one question: you still going to do Traina Thoughts? You're still going to do SNY? And he goes, make sure your phone's charged. And I was like, okay. And then that night started to come in. The next day, onslaught. Even this morning, still to now, getting congratulatory texts and emails. It's been and tweets, of course. It's been overwhelming.
Forget tweets, because that's almost impossible to keep up with. Give me the percentage of texts you've returned.
All of them. Every text.
Really?
Yeah. And not right at once.
Wow, that's impressive.
Because they've come in kind of staggered. Some are just a thank you, I appreciate it. Some a little bit longer than other. I got to tell you, two of my favorites. Actually, I'll give you three favorites. The first one was Susan Waldman. And now I've never talked to Susan. I worked with her years ago. I guarantee she doesn't even remember. This is like when I first started as an intern behind the scenes. I wake up to a text. I'm not going to say exactly what it said, but it was great. and it was tagged Susan Waldman. And I was like, oh my God, Susan, I love you. That one made me smile the most.
Two things on that. You got to love old people who, I shouldn't say that. You got to love older people who text when they sign their name. That's a big play with like people maybe like in their 60s. They sign their name to the text.
But I think she was doing it too because she must have gotten my number from. Right. I've never talked to her before, so I wouldn't have known who it was if she didn't say that.
And I want to say Susan is all class and she gets so much unnecessary shit and it pisses me off. And I think we could easily figure out why. But I did a awful, and I mean awful, radio show when I was in college 500 years ago at CW Post. And, it was basically me just trying to be Mike and the Mad Dog, basically. And she came on as a guest with me while I was in college.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And it was like her. I got like 3 or 4 guests like from that. I think Ian might have done it, Rich Samini. So I'll never forget that because they didn't have to do that.
You've been booking guests since then. That's a long time. So that was a thrill for me to, I love Susan. So, and like I said, not having a relationship with her prior to that, or at least through text, that meant the world to me. Because who thinks that Susan Waldman even knows who I am, let alone like listening on occasion?
Well, you're on the Fan. She's the part of the Fan history, the first voice ever heard on the Fan. She knows who's on the Fan.
I know who she is. I didn't know she knows who I am.
Think about it, too. You're on the air at 2 a.m. That's probably when she's first getting home from Yankee Stadium after night games.
Right. Okay, so then you're thinking, okay, she's listening, but does she like me? I'm a loudmouth idiot sometimes. Yeah, like, would Susan like my work? So she was happy for me, and I couldn't believe that. The other one you mentioned, and this is a little less because I was expecting a text from Ian. And as a matter of fact, he texted later in the day, and I go, it's about fucking time. I've been waiting all day for this. And then we had a very funny exchange, so I love that. Third one, and there were plenty. I'm not going to try to leave anybody out, but the third one was the owner of the New York Islanders, who I also never had a relationship with. I met him, John Ledecky. I've met him out going to the games, and I've been in his suite, but we've never texted or anything like that before. And he sent me a nice text congratulating me, and I thought that was cool.
If I would have gotten a text, if I got a text and it said, Jimmy, enjoy the podcast, John Ledecky, I have no idea who it was. Yeah. I couldn't name the Islanders owner if you paid me to. I was, it's funny. I meant to text you this last night, and I totally forgot. You just reminded me. And I don't know if I should ask it on the air, but let it fly. Did you get texts from Mike Francesa and Chris Russo?
I did not hear from Dog. I have heard from Mike.
Dog, because I know why. Because I listened to Dog's show. Dog's entire show today was about the Titanic thing. So he's all wrapped up in that. So
now remember, I love Dog. Dog was always my favorite on-air personality. I think we had a very good relationship. I babysat his kids, the story or whatever. But I was always more of a Mike guy. Mike kind of just took me under his wing, and he went to bat for me. And I was there with him when Dog left. Dog is definitely not keeping up with your career, because when I had him on this podcast 2 weeks ago, I said, Sal Licata comes on every week and does a segment. No idea.
I had no idea. I did not know that, Jimmy.
Oh wow, wow. No, I know that. So Mike was in touch prior to the announcement.
Right.
When he, maybe got some wind or some stuff. But so, yes, that was nice.
I'll text you later. Send me the screen grab. All right. So, like I said, I got a billion texts. Not billion. I got a ton of tweets. I want to read some of them because I'll tell you, I was really happy that so many people. I mean, I got so many texts from people saying, "Are you still going to do this?" It was crazy.
And I honestly I didn't know, and I still don't, to be blunt with you, what's possible or not. I have to go over that, the details and stuff, what I'm allowed to do, what I'm not. But obviously, I'm hoping.
Yeah. But I'm hoping if the Fan gives you okay, then when you're done at 2:00, you do this for 10 minutes, and then, it's not taking up too much of your day.
Right. I don't think it should be a problem schedule-wise, because I'm going to have a gap in between anyway of free time.
So I got some texts here. I had some tweets here. This was BM Ring 23. Are you more happy for Sal that he got a promotion, or for yourself that you can go with him to Maureen's now more often? You're goddamn right. I'm happy he's going to be more available to go to Maureen's kitchen.
You know what the thing is too? It's not even like, because I was off weekends technically, but
right.
You're a zombie at times doing that overnight schedule. So now, like when I'm home on a Friday night and I'm done for the work week, I'm going to be functioning like a normal human being into Saturday and into Sunday. Right. So it does make a difference.
This did not come in off the announcement of your job promotion. This came in when I asked my users for questions for my mailbag that I write every week. And someone said, can you ask Sal who ate Mike Francesa's egg roll? Do you want to address that story?
Yes, because we've told this story before, but people still get it mixed up. I was there when it happened. I was in the newsroom. I remember it well. It was an intern by the name of Jeff Barr. They used to leave food on there's this area here where they used to have carts kind of in the middle of the newsroom. And people used to, like, it was food for grabs. Like if I brought in donuts or whatever, you leave the donuts up there. So usually it was whatever's up there was for grabs. Mike happened to leave his food up there during a break, went into the studio to do the show, comes back out, and his egg roll's missing. It was Jeff Barr, ate it. And Mike goes to the kid, not the worst thing you could do, but it's not good. He ate Mike's egg roll. That really happened. The kid thought it was up for grabs.
And how did this story get out?
That's a great question that I don't know the answer to.
Yeah, somehow this story got out that someone at WFAN once ate Mike Francesa's egg roll. And like Deadspin wrote a story about it.
Somebody must have either mentioned it on the air or got it out there in something. I don't know. I don't remember how it got out there, but it happened. No. Fact. Jeff Barr. He will live in infamy forever for being the intern that ate Francesa's egg roll.
I just love that this is a big mystery. Patrick Webb, will Sal Licata continue to be on the podcast, or will he start big timing you now?
Big timing? Come on.
Let me see here. Will Sal still be on the pod? Oh, I'm sure you heard Mike Gill. I hope Sal Licata will still be able to do Jimmy Traina's Thoughts. I'm sure you heard from Adam Shine.
I did. He texted me.
Because he actually texted me about how happy he was for you. That's
nice. Shine. I heard from Shine, from Burkhart. Yeah. I'm trying to think of some others that you would know.
Some guy, Matt Cohen. Marchand scooped you, though, meaning me.
Yeah, well, you can't break any of that stuff because they know exactly where it comes from if you break it.
If you think I found out when Marchand broke it. When I first found out Tiki was leaving, Sal was the first name I thought of. Great for him, but probably terrible, as no more excuses of having to sleep to avoid housework.
Yeah. I mean, the overnight was a convenient excuse not to do certain things I didn't want to do. That's now out the window.
Peter Schrager with a tweet. Very cool news. Happy for your best recurring podcast guest.
That's nice of Schrager. I appreciate that.
I don't want to read that one.
What? I've seen some bad ones. Whatever. I don't read the comments.
Good one from Art Vandelay. The only thing that sucks about this is I won't get to wake up to a wild Sal Licata rant being replayed by the morning show anymore.
Yeah, I know. Look, the overnight was an important shift, and those guys helped me out by playing some of those clips back. I'll miss the shift itself as far as like the listeners.
Right.
And the bond that you have on the overnight. But come on. I mean, this is a huge upgrade for me.
What is it like for you? I mean, it's happened before, but not to this scale where like you're in the articles written by Marchand and Best and awful announcing, and you didn't even know about the awful announcing article till I told you about it.
No, I did not. Now I got a little not used to it, but I got acclimated to it last year with the NL East is over thing. And like you said, It's happened on occasion before, but this is a bigger deal. I'll tell you, it was cool to read today's Newsday because I grew up on Newsday, and 13 years almost to the day that I got fired. And the headline by Neil Best, which was the last time that he's contacted me, was Sal Licata out at WFAN. 13 years to the day.
That's
and
insane.
now
Insane.
now you have him writing about me, moving to middays with Brandon Tierney. So that was cool. And like I said, Newsday. I'm from Long Island, so that means a lot.
Well, it's a great day. Great news for you, professionally and personally. Selfishly, it's good for this podcast. I love that so many people are happy for you. So, and your first day on that new shift is July 24th.
Yes, I'm done with the overnights next week, but then because of summer scheduling and vacationing, that actual show, me and Brandon, will not start until July 24th.
Right. All right. I don't even want to talk about anything else.
Well, I appreciate your support. I know you and I initially met when Rich Ackerman of The Fan told me about Hot Clicks, that you had mentioned me, that you're big fans of the Sal special when Francesa used to have me on after Russo left, and I would give my picks. And that initiated, you and I talking, and then eventually meeting up and becoming friends. I mean, that's over 13 years ago. I don't even remember how long ago that is, but you're talking about 2006, 2007, right?
Yep.
So you've been supportive from then, and then having me on the podcast obviously helped. So I appreciate the kind words and the support as always.
It was your hard work. If you're a good friend, then did you listen to me last week and watch Smartless?
I did. I did watch the first episode of Smartless. I enjoyed it. My wife was on the fence about it. I think she enjoyed it, but it's not something that she's going to invest time in. But I will watch it because I enjoyed it. Jason Bateman's my favorite. I love him. He's
just
hilarious.
Tremendous. He's good
hilarious.
At that.
And he's such a nut, too.
I haven't rewatched, I watched it all that one weekend, but I see clips all day long when I scroll through TikTok, and I watch every clip and just I don't know. I don't want to give spoilers, but just it gets better as it goes on too. Like it really, the first episode was like a feel out episode, and I was like, I like this. I'm not sure, but then you just get so invested in all the ridiculously.
My favorite part of the first episode is when they're walking to the Washington Monument, I think.
Yeah. And
some girls walk by or some strangers walk by or whatever, and they go, "Hey, have you seen Ozark?" Like trying to bust baby balls. Yeah. I think that's so.
That was good.
I love that shit.
We're not even gonna. I have one. I'll tell one quick story. We're not even gonna get into any other topics. This had to be all about you this week. I put it on Instagram, so you probably didn't see this. You didn't see the story about me in the Apple store with my niece?
No.
Okay. So I'll leave you with one story from my week. I had to take my younger niece, her iPhone broke, needed to take, so we went to the Apple store, I had to buy her a new iPhone. Fine. So we go, me, my younger niece, my older niece, and I get the younger niece the iPhone. And, when you get a new phone, you're in the store for a while because they which phone do you want? What are your options? They jerk you off for a little bit. Then then they set up the new phone. So at one point there was like a big lull where there was some downtime. So I say to the guy helping us, I go, I'm just curious, by the way, since, you're not doing anything. Come September when the new phones come out, I want to get a new phone. I go, but I got a bunch of scratches on this phone. You think I'll be hurt with the trade-in value, or do you think I'll still get a decent amount? So he looks at the phone. He goes, this phone's great. You're in great condition. You shouldn't have any problems. So I go, well, there's one pretty bad scratch right here in the top right. And he looks at it. He's like, no, he's like, he's good. He's good. He goes, you're good. He goes, as long as the crack doesn't spread, you're good. And my oldest niece turns to the guy, looks at him and goes, that's what she said.
Oh my.
So the guy walks away and goes, I'm done with my shift for the day. And then he came back and he was laughing. And I said, it's my fault because I basically forced both my nieces to watch The Office.
Oh my God.
I'm not going to lie. I was mortified and proud in that moment. I made these two kids watch The Office. I have forced them to watch The Office. She comes out with the "that's what she said" joke. What am I supposed to do?
Oh, that is fantastic. I was going to ask you if you were proud, so that's great. But obviously, you could be mortified at the same time.
Well, I was, afterwards I called a couple of my friends to tell them. So I called my friend Diesel to tell them the story. He's like, "Oh, that's great. I'm so proud." His wife Alicia, "Oh, that was good. I'm proud." I'm like, "Okay, but there's certain spots you need to regulate yourself." So
I think it was perfect usage myself. So,
I mean, listen, she didn't miss a beat.
That's
Thank
great.
God. Here's the thing: you have to that guy clearly watched The Office. If you don't watch The Office and you hear that, that's a big problem. But luckily, the guy got the joke right away. He watched The Office, and I said to the guy, "It's my fault. I made them watch The Office," and he was laughing. So
that's great.
All right. Yeah, I told that story on Instagram. I didn't want to put it on Twitter because then I would get like, "Why are you buying an iPhone at the Apple Store?" Like that whole,
right. Yeah,
right.
I might have to get on Instagram, but I've avoided it. I was on there, deleted it. I don't know.
Everyone on Instagram is nice. It's much better than Twitter. If you just want like nice reaction, it's different. It depends what you like. If you have a take about the Mets, it's not like that's not what Instagram is for. But
no, I think the only reason why I would do it is just for like business purposes,
right,
marketing purposes, and also to have another outlet aside from Twitter. Because what happens if Twitter goes awry or whatever,
Oh, Twitter's gone awry.
The idea of building up an audience it drives me nuts. All that again. So I don't know.
My advice to you is don't worry about that. Like create the account, post what you want. Don't worry about. I mean, listen, you could always go on Twitter and say like I'm on Instagram, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But plus also here's the thing: when you get on, when you're on the fan at 10 o'clock in the morning and you say I'm on Instagram, Sal Licata, like people are gonna go find it and follow it too. So you have a very powerful megaphone there. So all right, Sal. We will see you one more week of the overnights, and then July 24th, 10 a.m. on the fan, Monday through Friday with Brandon Tierney. And congratulations. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. See you later.
All right. All right. My thanks to Bryan Curtis and Sal Licata. If you enjoyed the episode and you're not a subscriber to SI Media with Jimmy Traina, hit the subscribe button. And please become a subscriber. Helps tremendously. And if you've missed any recent episodes and haven't listened, give them a listen. We've had some great guests in recent weeks. Last week, Scott Van Pelt from ESPN was on the podcast. 2 weeks ago, Chris Mad Dog Russo from SiriusXM and First Take. Pat McAfee 3 weeks ago on his big move to ESPN. And we had Stone Cold Steve Austin 4 weeks ago. So give those interviews a listen. Subscribe to SI Media with Jimmy Traina. And leave a review on Apple. We'll read it probably in 2 weeks. All right, that wraps it up. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Stay safe and take care.